Just give people a couple of minutes or a second to connect to audio. Okay, well, welcome everyone to the September 9th Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund Grants Committee meeting. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to go over a few of our kind of standard operating procedures here, and then we'll move into inspirational kind of opening and then introductions after that. So the virtual participation guidelines, the time on this has not been updated, so apologies for that. The public is invited to comment not at around 6:10 p.m., but it will probably be more like at around 7:10 p.m. The committee meetings are open to the public. The public is asked to observe and listen except during the public comment time. There are a lot of other opportunities if folks are interested in connecting with the program to engage in other forums. The chat box is open for introductions and is actually open right now. So if you want to go ahead and put your name, if you have an organizational affiliation, and if you want to share your preferred pronouns, you can put those into the chat box. That's also where you'll want to indicate whether or not you want to provide public comment. The raise hand function is used only by committee members, and we ask that folks who are participating, who are members of the public, keep their videos off unless they want to put them on during their public comment. Public members will also be muted unless they're giving public comment or for introductions, but actually the public, we will introduce the public just by reading from the chat box. This meeting is being recorded and there's captioning available in real time, and you can find that by going up to your Zoom menu and clicking on the three little dots, and then you get a drop-down menu, and you can see that the option for closed captioning is available there. Okay, so I think that we'll now turn it over. We generally start our meetings with an opening inspiration. We have been working very busily and kind of didn't get it together to think of something good ahead of time. So we did ask our committee members just a few minutes ago if there was anything that had inspired them since the last time we met, which was about 3 weeks ago. So if anybody wants to share, you can just raise your hand, and if not, I'm going to call on Sam and force the issue that way. Faith. Yay, see? I was almost about to say, it's not your birthday anymore, Sam.
That's right. Well, no pressure, but the thing that popped into my mind when Sam asked us the question a few minutes ago, and I'm not even sure this happened in the last 3 weeks, but just the reminder that relationships is what this is all about. We and New have recently had a conversation that was broadcast by video between Reverend Yearwood from Hip Hop Caucus and Gina McCarthy from the Natural Resources Defense Council. And the subject matter was excellent, right? It was about how energy equity or energy justice and security is actually racial justice. But what was more impressive, or what stuck with me more, is that relationships are at the heart of what we do. It's both the work and it's the solution, it's the outcome, and it's also the reward. So it's kind of, it was just a really beautiful encapsulation, and that's what I remembered when Sam asked us that question, is that relationships are why we're here, and it's both the end goal and the process that we need to embody to get to where we want to go. So maybe that's a bit of inspiration for others.
Thanks, Faith. That was great. Okay, we're going to move into introductions now, unless anybody else has anything they want to add. All right, well, we will start with committee member introductions.
Okay,
and I will just...
Rentis.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand up there. Go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted to, echo what I just heard from Faith. I think this has been a pretty tough week. And I feel like even saying that feels like an understatement with all that's going on in the world. But I get a lot of inspiration from many of our frontline workers who are out there helping fight many of these fires have been sparked. But also even just the kindness of strangers, folks who are helping each other out during these tough times. And I think that it's just a reminder that for many of our problems that we're facing here with society, it really starts with moving from the I to the we. So that's seeing those aspects play out in our communities and across the country. Those are things that I think keep me inspired and keep me showing up to meetings like this and working with some really great, awesome people on this committee and on staff and folks who on the community side who continue to show up. So I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Francis. Okay, we'll move into our introductions now. And just a reminder for anyone who might have joined the meeting since I said it, members of the public, you can introduce yourself by putting your name, if you have an organizational affiliation, and if you want to share preferred pronouns, just put that into the chat box. And if you're interested in providing public comment, indicate that there as well. So we'll start with committee member introductions, and we'll go with Megan.
Hi, everybody. Megan Horst, she, her, and PCEF committee member.
Maria.
Hi, everyone. Maria Sippin, she, they pronouns, PCEF committee member.
Michael.
Michael Eden Hill, he, him pronoun, PCEF committee member.
Robin.
Good evening, Robin Wang, PCEF committee member, he, him.
Francis.
Ranfis Giantino Viatoro, he, him, committee member.
Shanice.
Shanice Clark, she or they pronouns, committee member.
Faith.
Hey, everybody. Good to be with you again. Faith Graham, she, her, committee member.
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey Moreland, PCEF committee member, he, him.
And Andrea.
Hi, folks. Andrea Hamburg, committee member, she, her.
All right, now we'll move to staff. James.
Hi, everybody. James Valdez, PCEF staff, he, him pronouns.
Janet.
Good evening, everyone. Janet Hammer, she, her, PCEF staff.
Wendy.
Wendy Kufkin, she, her, PCEF staff.
And I'm Katie Lister, PCEF staff, she, her, and I'll turn it over to Sam to introduce himself and introduce members of the public.
Hey, folks. Sam Brasso, PCEF staff, he, him. And we've got with us in the audience, and I apologize in advance if I get your name not correctly or mispronounce your name. We've got Anissa Pemberton, they, them, PCEF Community Coalition. We've got Jenny Hall, she, her, Energy Trust of Oregon. We've got Troy Zablowski, he, him, Neil Kelly Company. We've got James Donnelly, Elevate Energy. We've got Kate Sacamano, she, her, Friends of the Children, Portland. We've got Audrey Forrest, she, her, Friends of the Children, Portland. Maggie Johnson, she, her, Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare, Director of Housing. Deidre Schutz, she, her, Nutrition Guard RX. Amanda Squemfenyazi, she, her, Karina for Oregon. Hannah Cruz, she, her, Energy Trust of Oregon. Ben Smoon, he, his, Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. Derek Thompson, Legends Become Leaders, Co-Director. Lizel Weimmuller, Workforce Development Manager at the Immigrant Refugee Community Organization, she, her. Angela Providelli, BPS staff. Aaron Fish, he, him, Sunbridge Solar. And Emily Davis, she, her, Kelly Nonprofit Consulting. Thank you all for being with us.
And I think we have one person. Oh, yep, one person on the phone. So if the person whose phone number ends in 1323 wants to unmute themselves and introduce yourself, and also let us know if you want to provide public comment.
I'm trying to unmute, but they do not seem to be unmuting. So apologies.
Okay.
I'll introduce one more in a correction real quick. Just it was apologies as leaders become legends. That's Derek Thompson as well as Bretta Jackson. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Okay, so this agenda for tonight is, and it doesn't look like we had anyone sign up for public comment, so we will move into the meat of the agenda, which is to discuss the request for proposal material that we sent to committee members, and it's also posted online on our website. And then as time allows, and enter into a bylaws discussion. Because it's a 2-hour meeting, we're not going to take a break. We're just going to try and plow through and adjourn on time at 9 o'clock. That's our goal. So Sam, I think, is going to do the first part of the presentation about the RFP and then pass it off to me in a few slides. Go ahead, Sam.
All right. Thank you, Katie. Okay, so this is just a reminder of where we are and sort of just what we have ahead of us so that we can ground ourselves in the timeline ahead as we hopefully will get to releasing the RFP next week. So as you see, really, and this timeline goes way back, all the way back until, the work that happened in January, February, but really it probably began in earnest in February with a lot of the subcommittee work. And then a lot of the work the past few months to develop all the grant scoring criteria and the frameworks. On August 12th, you guys got to agreement on all the grant scoring criteria as well as the grant application questions, the content. Since that time, we've been working on finalizing the final request for proposals that we hope to release next week. As part of that, there's a lot that's been involved in that, and we will talk a little bit more about that later. But I think the gist that we want to impress upon here is that we're a week out from releasing less than a week out from releasing the RFP. And so we've sort of, today, it's really important that, I think there's a few things that need to happen, but it's really tight timelines we're operating on. And I think we've pushed every instrument within our bureau to operate on those timelines. And we feel pretty good about our ability to strike on those timelines. But we certainly need sort of everything to fall into place, and we'll negotiate that if it doesn't. But I just want to stress that those timelines won't happen, certainly, if we don't get to approving the RFP this evening. Our hope, once we get to releasing the RFP, is to keep it open for 60 days. That'll push us out to about mid-November. And then we're going to get into a period of a really short period where we'll do just the eligibility screening and review of the applications. Then there'll be about a couple of weeks where we'll get a little bit over a week where we'll be doing technical review of the applications, just making sure nuts and bolts make sense before bringing together the scoring panels. And so the scoring panels will be really coming together through December and early January before the deliberation begins, I think, in earnest with the committee, I would say in early January. Once the committee makes some of those decisions, we expect to prepare the committee documents, finalize recommendations to City Council, then send those to City Council in February of 2021 with the hope that they take action at the late February 2021, announce the grant awards, celebrate. Then we will contract with, we will sign our grant agreements with all the folks that we've awarded and then begin the cycle again. So just want to, I guess we will certainly talk about the elements of what will happen during the release of the request for proposals, but want to see if anyone has any questions about the timeline here as we have it.
Robin.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I have a quick question. Oftentimes for grant RFPs like this, the grantor, I think it's the grantor, yeah, the grantor holds a webinar or kind of a FAQ session for applicants. Are there any plans for that? Sometime, I guess in late September-ish?
Yes. Sorry, Robin, keep going.
No, that's it. I'm done.
Yes, there is, and we will talk about that. I think it's not the next slide, but it's the following slide where we'll talk about the outreach and what sort of what opportunities folks will have to hear about the request for proposals, as well as ask questions about the request for proposals. So we will share a little bit about that in a second, but the answer to that in short is yes. Okay, let's move on to the next slide then.
Okay.
So now we're jumping in. So how will the information be presented for the request for proposals? It is an online application, which I think we talked quite a bit about in terms of there's a lot of questions where there's if-then skip patterns, and I think a lot of that will be alleviated because it's online, but that doesn't change the fact that before anyone jumps into their online application, they're probably going to download all the materials, read the questions, and understand how to ask those as well. So we will have sort of a package download which will contain all the content, all the application questions, the guidance documents, and Katie will share all those specific documents in a little bit, but it is an online application itself, but there is also a whole host of downloadable content for folks to review and help them prepare as they prepare their grant materials. Grant applications, we know that, folks sitting and reviewing things online, if you don't have several monitors or whatever else, it can be a lot. So we are also, we know folks can request us to print the materials and request those to be mailed. So we will be taking and requesting and mailing applications once a week from the Bureau, just so that folks that need all those application material by paper will have them by paper. We will be translating the primary explanatory documents into 7 languages. And if you all ask me, I can be forced to answer those, but and maybe I'm actually just going to go ahead and pull up those 7. Well, if folks are interested, I'm happy to just look that up real quick and speak to the 7 languages that we are translating the primary document. So this is the handbook content that you all received to make sure everyone knows all the background materials. All additional documents can be translated upon request, and we will be emailing out likely tomorrow or Friday asking to see whether folks are interested in translating the rest of the content. So this is the rest of the application questions, the grant agreement, whatever else folks decide they need to have translated as well. And then applications can be submitted online through the online application, via email, or via post mail as well. So does anyone have any questions about how the information is available or how the information can be submitted?
Yeah, Sam.
Oh, no, yeah.
I presume that if an organization wanted like 50 packets to give out to folks in their community who they thought would be interested in applying, that we would provide that? Yeah,
absolutely. I appreciate you. It would probably exhaust what our immediate print would be, but we would provide that. We've got our print shop just at the bottom of the BPS building, and we've got staff that'll be going in and doing weekly printings for requests that are made. So. Ramkis.
As for an access question, will these applications be accessible for folks with any visual impairments? Would there be any way to sort of help address that as an access barrier?
We've worked with our communications team on ensuring that everything within all of our application documents, within the online application, within both the online sort of application at the website that shares all the background information, as well as the application platform that we've developed. All of that is accessible via readers. So all of the content has been formatted, out of tables so that readers can, so folks that are visually impaired can use readers, and it's formatted in such that the headers and everything else are set up such that readers can work through the documents.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. This is just a little bit of our outreach plan. As we released the RFP, you all just had a communications training beforehand, and you heard the press release was dead. But we will have a press release, but we will also send out the application via both our Portland Clean Energy Fund listserv, as well as the Bureau's listserv, which is just broader. We will send it, we will tap into partner networks and listservs. We will obviously have our BPS webpage that will be accessible. Before I jump into webinars, we will also be posting it on social media, as well as creating social media kits for community partners who wanna just share out the content that the application is available. In addition to that, during the application period, probably not the first week and the last week, we still need to schedule them, but we will be hosting 6 webinars. So weekly webinars pretty much through the middle of the application, excluding the first week and the last week. And then we will be co-hosting webinar. We will be offering to co-host webinars as well. And this was a comment we received last time. We will be offering stipends for those that are interested in co-hosting webinars with us for particularly populations that may be either linguistically isolated or just culturally specific populations, and making sure that they're going to be groups that are going to say, we want to make sure we have an information session for our community, and we will offer that, and we will offer stipends for supporting us and getting the word out that way. It will be a lot of Zoom meetings. Okay, and unfortunately, no in-person events. Okay, next slide. Technical assistance. So again, in addition to just the webinars that we will be hosting, which the webinars will be information sessions, but will be places where we gather questions. And there will be, we will be answering questions and having a live section on the website where we will be weekly answering questions and having a weekly log of just questions that come in that were not in the RFP or stated somewhere in the application that we are answering for everyone to see. So that will exist, and we expect to get a big chunk of those questions coming through on our webinar, as well as just emails directly to staff and through one-on-ones. We will be hosting grant writing workshops. We'll have about 4 grant writing workshops through that period that we are contracting in order to just help folks think through, and those workshops will be tailored to our grant application and then helping folks think through our particular application. We will be offering direct assistance to staff through just one-on-ones. And then we will be posting a resources page on the website with just a brief set of resources to help folks know about additional funding, as well as just some background content area. Okay. I think Katie, the next slide, maybe I haven't looked at it. I don't know if it's me handing it off to you. So before we get there, okay. I want to just see if there are any questions about both just how to access the application itself, how we are the formats in which we are providing the application, our outreach plan to make sure folks are hearing about the opportunity in the application itself, as well as any questions about just the technical assistance that we're going to be offering during the application period.
Looks like Randy.
Yeah, thanks for this overview, Sam. I guess as we come across community members interested in applying for this, we should encourage them, obviously, to check our website, look up dates for workshops, but we should be encouraging also folks to reach out to staff. Is there key staffers that we should be pointing folks to reach out to?
Right now I would say just sending them to the Clean Energy Fund account will be the best way just to help us out, because in part I will be encouraging just as part of the work that different folks will be out during this period. Also, just think there will always be sufficient staff in the office, but this is also a key time to make sure that staff are taking their respective times away. So the Clean Energy Fund account is something that we're going to be monitoring pretty actively, as well as just our phone lines, in order to make sure we're immediately responding to requests for information or requests for meetings. Okay, and we will make sure that we just, I think, given the role that you are in, and just in order to push that information out, you all are just another outreach channel as well. Your networks are just as valuable. We will make sure that information is clearly visible for you all to be able to direct folks to. Okay. So Katie, if I'm not mistaken, then I think it is on to you.
Yep, thanks, Sam. You can tell that these are my slides because there's no pictures on them or graphics. So this is just a list of the material that we sent to you. So I'm not going to read the list, but you all kind of, you all know what you got. Hopefully you had an opportunity to look through it. One thing that I did want to point out though, before just about the material that we sent you is that because we don't have we didn't go the route of having one big RFP like PDF that we could download and had a lot of appendices, because we have information that is being provided in web format and also kind of in downloadable packets and then and online through the application portal. It's kind of difficult to like see how it all comes together until it all comes together. So we, in working with our comms team, are starting to see that. But I just wanted to note about the handbook content in particular, that really is, that's web content. And so there's a lot of kind of like how it's being presented and the formatting of it that will look a little bit different than the documents that you got, just because it's a document and not a website. So just wanted to point that out. So, and then the next slide is just a list of additional kind of RFP resource material that is again being delivered in a kind of appropriate way to try and have like an easy user experience so that people are seeing the information that they need and understand, and not seeing information that doesn't apply to the type of project that they're applying for, and also that they have a good understanding of kind of like, here's the information that is absolutely required. You must have these documents and these forms in order to apply for a project. And here's some additional resources if you're just interested, and that sort of thing. So the additional RFP resource material are, the first one is a guidance for application questions. And that's actually three different, it's 3 documents or 3 sets of information. One that goes with the planning grants, one that goes with small grants, and one that goes with large grants. And that is just a question by question guidance. And it's not necessarily, we wouldn't expect someone to read that document from top to bottom. It's more designed for if folks are stuck on a question and they don't fully understand what we're asking for, or they'd like to see an example, then they can look up that question in the guidance for application questions. And there we'll provide them kind of the reason that we're asking the question, some instructions for answering the question, like if there's math involved or something like that, and then some examples of what we might expect to see. Then there are the scoring tables, and those are really, like the application evaluation guidance tables that are for reviewers. A lot of times, a lot of grant programs don't put that information out to the public. This is, it's just for use of for the folks who are sitting on the scoring panels. The only reason that we're putting them out there is just for the purposes of transparency. And so some folks can read them. It might help them tailor their project or inform kind of how they write their application, but it really is just for use on the scoring panel. So there is one for planning grants, one for small grants, and one for large grants. And then there's also the tables that show if you're, which criteria apply to you depending on what type of project you are, which is most relevant for the large grants. You guys might recall that table. We showed it to you a few meetings, or maybe a couple of meetings ago, that just depending on the size of your physical improvement. And then there's a sample grant agreement, which is kind of we've been working with the city attorney's office to try and tailor the kind of the standard city template to be useful and user-friendly and work for our program. And I think it's important to include just so folks, kind of know what some of the legal requirements are, what they're getting into. And then there is a document that covers wage requirements, and those are primarily related to prevailing wage requirements, and then, of course, the 180% of minimum wage. There are definitions for the terms that we use in all of the documents, but in the application process. There is a description of the methodology that we're using for estimating greenhouse gas reduction or greenhouse gas impact. And we're making it really clear that we're not asking applicants to do that themselves, but just so if they want to know how we're going to do it, we're providing that methodology for them. And then there is a resources webpage that has a curated list of kind of additional information and resources on relevant topics. And hopefully that's it. We won't add more documents, but this is these are additional resource materials that we didn't flood your inbox with. They're not. It would be possible for you to fill out the grant application and without ever having looked at any of these. We certainly hope that people will look at them and will find them useful. But they're not they're not like the core documents, which are the ones that we sent you for review.
I think the one document we may add is a checklist.
Oh yeah, there's a checklist. Yes. So, are there any questions? We didn't. There are no more slides in the kind of presentation about the RFP material. We really thought that we sent you a big packet of pages of information to look over, and so it didn't seem like it would be a good use of time to kind of go through that information in the public meeting because it would take so long. Andrea?
Yeah, first of all, congratulations. This is an incredible amount of work, and thank you all so much. So in the guidance document for the applicants, you talk a little bit about reporting requirements, and it says like we're open to creativity, which I love. I love that the reporting plan should be relevant to the community that the project benefits. But I'm also curious about how you'll archive those creative reporting solutions and document them for evaluations of the program's success, for future curiosity for the public who want to see how this money is being utilized.
That is a really good question, Andrea. I will say that, I mean, we certainly have, records retention policies within the Bureau and the city that we have to follow, and are working on with the Bureau of Finance, I forget what it's called here, the Bureau of Management and Finance, to procure to participate in the procurement of a citywide grants management database that can also kind of house lots of different types of documents and lots of different types of files. So I think, one of the things that your question made me think of was, what if somebody does a performance as a piece of telling the story about their project, which would be great. And so I imagine that we would hope that we could videotape that and archive that file. If that wasn't a possibility, we would certainly include it in kind of like the final closing report that the project manager will do about a project when a grant is complete, and that kind of would go into the file. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
If you have thoughts on that, we would be interested in hearing them for sure.
I mean, I might like to see there be a requirement that things be documented, no matter what creative solution was was put into the application.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there any other questions? I know Robin, you sent in some questions and more they were comments. There were a few questions and comments about the material that we sent that we sent to y'all last week. I don't know if you want to talk about those in the committee, or if you don't have them pulled up in front of you, I do have them pulled up in front of me, so I'd be happy to speak to them if you wanted to just kind of have those questions and with our answers on the record.
Yeah, I have the document or my comments in front of me.
Okay.
A lot of it is kind of nitty gritty details so I'm going to skip those. Should I just kind of walk through them?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, skip the typo for sure.
Yeah.
We'll
Okay.
fix that.
Oh, that was the one I was going to type.
Yeah.
So in the handbook, there's a section that talks about restriction of funds. And the two questions that I had was, one, there is something about land acquisition, and was wondering if there's any stipulations on the sale of land that was funded by PCEF funds. And then the second one relates to gentrification. There's been a lot of conversations, on this committee about ensuring that, we're not creating pressures for gentrification. And I didn't see any comments in the restriction of funds section that talks about, gentrification, mitigation.
Yeah. Well, so I think that I can answer those in order. Related to land acquisition, there is a requirement that that the transfer of ownership of any real property that's purchased using grant funds that the city be notified and that the city approve that transfer of ownership. So, which is fairly standard, and so that would apply to land ownership. That would apply to purchases of land as well. And then related to sorry, go ahead.
Is that kind of in perpetuity? Because I think there is a language in there that says the useful life of the asset. So if a solar panel, I think has whatever 30-year lifespan. Land doesn't really have a lifespan unless you're talking to the IRS, which is I think 27.5 years. Is that land locked forever?
So no, and I didn't know that the IRS had said that land had life of 27.5 years.
Well, it's depreciation, so it's not really.
Oh, okay. No, I think for most projects for regenerative agriculture projects, it depends on the type of use of the land. I think for regenerative agriculture projects, we are generally saying that unless when folks apply, they provide us information that would lead us to kind of extend what we're calling the useful life just for purposes of calculating greenhouse gas reductions or greenhouse gas impacts, that we're setting that at 5 years. But if somebody said, hey, I'm going to purchase this land and I'm going to use it in this way for 20 years, and there's sort of there is good evidence that that is reasonable, then we would extend that. If it was land for a building, for sort of a high efficiency building or for purchasing real estate, generally we have been going with a 20-year life on kind of building efficiency or building clean energy types of projects, which is what it would have to be. But that is an interesting specific question that I don't know that we have a very one clear answer for. That almost feels like something that would be certainly handled in a grant agreement during the negotiations and would kind of become a clause in the grant agreement. But Sam, I don't know if you have any other thoughts you want to add.
Not necessarily on useful life for just measurement of GHG emissions, but if Robin, if you're talking about whether they have to notify, just to be clear, are you asking whether they have to notify and get our permission to sell land for the entirety of their ownership of that property, or whether that has a limit in terms of when they need permission from the city in order to sell a property that was acquired with PCEF funds?
I mean, both, really. I mean, I don't want people flipping the land, 2 years after we do, we fund something. At the same time, it's very reasonable, at some point in the distant future for organizations to sell that land. And, I don't want, that there to be a hindrance on that either. So there's some middle ground, and I'm just kind of curious, what flexibility is there?
Yeah, this is a good legal question that Katie, I'm thinking we may need to follow up with, because there's the grant agreement. The grant agreement does have a life between the city and the grantee in terms of, but I don't know whether that seeking that permission needs to, whether we need to write that a little differently. Anyways, so it's a good question we can follow back up with after connecting with the city attorney.
Okay.
Okay. And I should acknowledge that it's part of the process, which we just didn't get to. Once we award the grants, there's our sample grant agreements, but there is still a negotiation where we fine tune exactly what is in the grant agreement with each grantee. So there is that space exists.
Grantees and then Faith.
Sort of a similar question from Robin. I see similar language for purchasing materials and services. For materials, supplies, and equipment. It says that goods that will become the property of the grantee cannot be resold during its useful life. And has similar language around change of ownership and notifying the city. That kind of assumes that every grantee application that is purchasing goods would be the final ownership of the grantee. That makes sense. So I guess I guess I understand the logic, but is that application seems very narrow just to the grantee. It doesn't take into consideration all the various different potential forms of ownership for a solar panel or an HVAC system, where you might have an organization that's the lead applicant, but might not be the final owner. So I don't know if either of you, if anyone here has thought through that piece, or if it's really intentionally just meant to be, hey, if you're the grantee and you're the owner, you just got to notify us. But if it's just a grantee and that those goods are a pass through to someone else, we just don't really care about tracking that equipment. Does that make sense? Trying to understand.
It does make sense. Yeah, and I think that we certainly always imagined that there would be weatherization and solar projects where, a homeowner would become the owner of the stuff. And I don't think in those circumstances we would be wanting to track, wanting to ask people to consult with us if the ownership changed. But the land question is a good one. Sort of as the way that you described it, if it was sort of more just a pass through to a different owner. So that is something that we should. I don't think that I had imagined that scenario with land in particular. Faith and Michael, both had their hands up and now they're down. And I just wanted to make sure that they didn't still have something to add to the conversation. Oh, now they're both back up. Okay. Okay, Faith and then Michael.
Sorry about that. I had the same thing highlighted. I didn't actually see where land was called out as not being able to be transferred without consent. I only saw that other property needed consent. I think it's a really great thing that you raised, Robin. I started thinking about it from a building perspective. So if you're looking at it from the built environment, I don't think it works, because I don't know how you purchase land if the value of the land is less than 30% of the project. of the renewable or clean energy project. So maybe it's in limited circumstances, but perhaps this is related to ag. And so maybe then we've got a different kind of issue, in which case you're also probably not making a huge profit, and it's probably not a gentrification issue. So maybe it's slightly alleviated by some of the other restrictions, but I do think it's a really important thing for us to nail down. And maybe we don't try to anticipate every scenario that can be, and simply say that you can't transfer land that you bought with PCEF funds for 10 years or something like that without city approval. I don't know. But I'm glad you're going to look into it. Thank you for doing that.
This is Randpiece. I would just, sorry to cut in, but I would assume that for many development projects, for like a building, you'd have a developer that would probably own the land, whether it's an affordable unit or commercial or mixed use. And after the project's complete, there would be a transfer of the ownership of the land. So I could see in some cases, even this could apply for construction projects.
Yeah, and the developer would be just working with a nonprofit to develop that. Yeah. Michael, did you? Your hand went down again, but
I was just going to say that I think that, you know, Ramfis's question about equipment being unable to resell it, I'm assuming that's on pass-through, so that once the grantee gets that equipment, whether it's coming through a contractor or subcontractor, they cannot resell it. They have to install. It can't just be, you know, solar panels can't show up on site and then you put them on Craigslist kind of thing. And then I'm also assuming that most of the land that's going to be bought, especially for ag, is going to be in land trust. And so my concerns are a little less on resale. I can imagine that maybe they need to resell the land in order to purchase other land. But I think that it'll probably be in trust. It'll be a land trust within the organization, and require, you know, multiple parties to agree to any sale of the land anyway.
Just to kind of confirm, Michael, that generally has been our assumption, that as part of even our GHG, our greenhouse gas emissions assumptions, in order to make assumptions around savings, it is that if you have, for instance, if you do have a land trust agreement, then that's how you get more savings on a regenerative ag projects, because you'll have a land trust for 30 years. You'll have it in trust for 30 years or so. And so that has been the expectation, and that's some of the basis, and that's where we do expect to see land acquisitions.
so I think that, and Robin, I haven't forgotten your second question, but I do think that just probably this question can be addressed by just having a quick touch base with our legal counsel tomorrow, and adding some language into the handbook content, which is on the website, because essentially this will be addressed specifically in grant agreements once grant funds are awarded, and we have more information about the particularities of the different projects. But I would be interested to know if, from the committee members, from any of the committee members, if there is any particular philosophy or kind of that you would like kind of carried through in that kind of control of the resale of equipment and materials and lands and things that are purchased using PCEF funds. Megan?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to think this specific issue through, in part because it's not really in this stuff, right? You're talking like most of this will come out more in the agreement. But speaking of, or thinking about regenerative ag projects, well, I think Michael raises a good optimistic point that hopefully these are, if they're acquiring land, they hopefully would go in trust, but I don't know that we can assume that. there are some land trusts that operate in the Portland area. Yeah, I think that's something that we should talk about more. And I think that might be something we want, because in terms of regenerative ag, it's a long-term project to sequester carbon. So from a climate perspective, but also from a preserving land in a growing urban area for long-term food growing. Like, I don't think we want them to turn around and sell that land. It's a little different than a building. I don't know. It's worth thinking about, and I wonder, it may be something that we need to develop that out a little bit differently than for solar panels and buildings. But I almost kind of wonder if sort of an expectation that the land is held in trust. And I would think, I don't know about this 27-year thing, but some land trusts have 99-year leases, some are into perpetuity. That seems better to me from a climate sequestration perspective. But yeah, so I don't know if I have a fully formed thought there, but just in regenerative ag, I think more not wanting those folks to turn around and sell the land in 5 years is is something I would feel pretty strongly about.
Yeah. Thanks, Megan. Faith?
Yeah, I also, so I think the theory that we want to embed, right, or the philosophy that we want to embed is that the use that we approve for the grant, whatever that be, and the community that's intended to benefit will continue to benefit even if there's a proposed transfer. So I think that requires city approval. Like if we could anticipate that in 2 years it transfers to a new nonprofit, and we would be totally fine with that if the use continued to be the same and the community benefited in the same way. So I think, yeah, again, the philosophy I think is just that the originally granted intent and use of the dollars and benefit was going to continue to be the same. That's what I would want to ensure.
Michael?
Thanks for letting me just raise my hand. I guess in response to Faith, I'm not sure that I want communities of color to be like, if you are a nonprofit and you get a clean energy project put on your building, I'm not sure that it's any business after that of the city's how you buy, sell, occupy, otherwise use your building. It seems a little too baby city for me. It seems a little too like, we don't trust you with your decisions for your organization. I feel like it's putting our nose where it doesn't belong. It feels very sort of presumptuous that the city knows better than you do how your end would work, right? I think that we do that, and we assume that communities make the best decisions for themselves still. That's all. That's all I worry about, is that once again, it would be, you know, the kind of traditional power players deciding what happens to communities of color.
Michael, can I just respond real quick? I really appreciate you saying that, and I think it's a totally fair point. Yeah, totally fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think Faith and Michael, you both just really clearly articulated the kind of two sides of the equation there, right? Like, if we have a competitive process that's based on assumptions of benefits being felt by certain people for a certain amount of time, then you know, there's a desire to try and make sure that happens, but but also it's an absolutely fair point that people know how to best take care of themselves, and we don't want to be paternalistic. So I think that it's we'll take those two philosophies with us. Sam, did you want to add anything?
I think, you know, these elements within the grant contracts they're checks in the process. I mean, you know, we support self-determination, but it's a check in that process. And I think in part, it is based on the relationships and trust we have with us as staff to follow, to essentially be able to hear what a community group is saying and saying, this is what they're going to do. And we say, yep, that makes sense. There's a balance to safeguarding the public trust, but also allowing a community self-determination. And so our grant agreements aren't written so tight. It really is. It's not necessarily just a consent. It is the city would approve, but it isn't. I don't know. I guess there's a balance there. Maybe that's all I think. I would suspect that for all the reasons the community groups would express around the need for why they would sell property and repurpose or whatever else, that would be in alignment with the purposes of that we've stated here. And it may just be that those sort of decisions account for the guiding principle. Those sort of decisions are made in with the guiding principles in mind. I'm not exactly sure, but that is it's a gray area that I hope that as staff that we've that we're at least well in tune with the community to be able to effectively support self-determination.
So I'll just throw out, I think, a couple of examples, and other folks are probably really familiar with some requirements that, you see sometimes from different funders. But, there's certainly, like the Department of Energy generally, if you purchase anything that's worth over $10,000, you have to get permission to change ownership of it within sort of like the first 10 years. Or there are things like that. So I think, to kind of Faith thought that there would be, or Faith was like, what about 5 years or something like that? That certainly is a direction that some funders go. They just kind of pick a period of time that they feel comfortable with, and then and recognizing that might be at the very end of something's useful life, at the very beginning of it, right in the middle. I think one of the things that we have and you all have wrestled with during this whole process is that we're funding lots of different kinds of projects with sort of one solicitation. So some of that kind of the specificity that is associated with different types of activities gets into the like grant negotiation part of the process. Faith?
Yeah, I just really think that's a fair point, and I wanted to lift up what Michael said again, and it really depends on the grantee, which is a complicated place to be. In real estate development, the work that I've spent my career doing, I wouldn't want it to be open-ended with the developers that I've dealt with, and to be able to just profit from the grant money you got from PCEF. So I do think it really matters what the use and the intent is, and I like knowing that we'll have a grant agreement that's going to be able to be specific to who the grantee is and to what the project is, so that we can support self-determination and not provide unnecessary benefit to business as usual.
Thanks, Faith. Randy?
Yeah, I think, thank you for all the sort of suggestions on this. I too am kind of balancing sort of the needs for our community organizations that will be applying for these funds, as well as I think the needs for our voters who approved this measure and that due diligence. I think I can't say that I know every community organization and that will be applying for these funds. I know historically within construction, purchasing materials and whether they're ultimately used on projects or not, or how they're resold. I think there's been reasons why I think it's been really important to track expenditures and making sure that they're being used for what they're being intended for their intended purposes. I think this, historically there's just importance of that. I think the added importance here is equipments that are meant to advance energy efficiency and energy generation. those are clear examples that we hope that they're used for their intended purposes to meet our climate goals. And when they're not being used for those intended purposes, I think, we don't really have a great verification process. That even this feels like, I don't feel like that's at this moment feels too burdensome as it's written. But I do want to make sure that it's clear for all of our grantees that it's clear how this rule is going to apply, and that it's easy or clear for them how to remain compliant to all of our provisions. So that's, I think, really important for me, is making sure that folks aren't accidentally non-compliant, and that we make it clear and make it easy for applicants to be compliant on some of these provisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Michael?
I guess that for me, a developer is one thing that, but if we're talking a nonprofit, like say a workforce development organization, and let's say they do a clean energy project and renewable energy and put solar panels on their building, and then 3 years after the project's complete, they get an opportunity to move to a better space or a bigger building. But part of that is, selling their current property. I'm not sure that that's for us to say, like, oh, but we paid for your solar, so you need our approval in order to sell the building. I think that at that point, it's a clean energy project. It's up and running. And I don't think it's going to get torn down by new ownership. I guess.
Michael,
is that what? Am I off base here?
No, I just want to say what we would say emphatically there is yes, you can sell your building. I think it'd be hard pressed for very obvious we'd be hard pressed to say no in any of those kinds. I think it's really just an opportunity to have that check-in, so that's something that we don't want to happen. It's less about just preserving that say, but obviously that say has implications. So I think in that kind of scenario, we'd say, yep, that makes sense, because at the end of the day, that renewable energy is still being generated whether or not that entity owns it, and the climate benefits were achieved, and the fact that they figured they can better serve their social goals by moving, it's totally in line with the PCEF goals. So that'd be a very squarely yes, but it does give us the chance to at least check in case is a different type of project without those sorts of rules and intentions.
Okay, and then who decides if we approve or not? Does that have to go before the committee? Does that go before the staff? Does that does it go before city council? Does it go before the? I mean, who decides to approve that?
Generally, I think that generally it would be the people would contact the project manager if there was a project manager still there who is familiar with the project, and then they would have it approved by the program manager, who is Sam. So I'd like to propose that that we can add some sort of clarifying language to that part of the funding restriction section that speaks to transfer of ownership, to make it clear that it is kind of part of the negotiation process, that permission will not be difficult to get or withheld for, there's some legal term that you often see, like permission won't be withheld without cause or unduly or something. Yeah. So that folks have a better idea of, just know that is, so that people are kind of aware that will be tailored to the specifics of their project, and isn't just kind of like an across the board rule. Michael?
I guess my last question is if it's like weatherization of a bunch of buildings or a bunch of little solar projects to sort of to a bunch of private homes, do we also have to prove sale of all those private homes since now that's also equipment? No.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that there has never been kind of the thought that improvements that go into weatherization or renewable generation that goes into private homes would be that there would be any sort of like legal strings attached to that equipment. Okay, I'm going to move. Oh, Megan.
Well, just a quick question on all this. Is all this stuff that it seems like we don't need to pin it down for the application, am I right? Because this goes more in the agreement. So is there a way we can maybe do a little thinking and circle back on this? And, you know, this conversation has me thinking a little bit about regenerative ag too, because while I see a lot of value in the long-term preservation of land that's specifically being cultivated for food and gardening and growing and farming and regenerative ag, I guess, you know, the reality is a nonprofit might not be able to keep sustaining it if they, you know, nonprofits in urban ag sometimes, you know, like they often need, if they don't have the money to keep sustaining it, what happens? If it's in trust, it wouldn't be developed. Anyway, it's just something to think about. And as we think about it, it might be good to call in a few of our regenerative ag partners that we've that are kind of in our larger brain trust to think through some of the implications of requirements, like the good and the bad of having requirements. So I guess since we don't have to decide tonight, and I don't feel like I have the right solution tonight personally, on that topic, I'd love to make sure we bookmark it and create a pathway to address it.
Yeah, absolutely, we can do that. And I would say that I guess the only thing that you mentioned, Megan, that we would need to address before releasing the RFP is if we were going to say purchase of land is required, but only if it goes into trust, if it's for a regenerative ag process. If it was that sort of firm requirement, that kind of information we really would want in the RFP because we would want people to know if that was something they were interested in. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
And
sorry, I heard someone else talking.
This is Sam. I think, I mean, it's hard. It's impossible to predict what we're going to see this year. So I don't want to just try to punt this to next year. It's an important question, and I do suspect that it's going to be something we're going to want to better hone in, certainly next year. And I think, but I just would agree with Katie. If there was a clear requirement such as that we were leaning towards, then it's something that they need to be able to project. They need to build into their proposal. There are requirements that we can negotiate as part of the grant agreements in terms of just teasing out exactly, okay, what is their intention with the land and figuring out how to strike a grant agreement that finds the right balance of sort of what are the protections we need to assure the GHG savings and other things. But if it's something programmatically as a policy that we were going to require, we would need to state that up front. So that doesn't preclude being able to still have these conversations. It's just if it was going to be if it was going to be something that we were going to explicitly call out, we would need to do it in advance.
Well, I would lean then towards not requiring it or not mentioning that because I don't know. I think we'd have to talk through all the possible implications of saying trust. There are only so many organizations in Oregon that are land trusts. A regular nonprofit, it's a lot of work for them to become one, and I don't think that's something I want to push. I don't want to push organizations to do that. But we just might want to, I think it's signaled that if you're acquiring land for ag, we kind of expect that to be have a long-term thinking probably. And I don't know, we can sort through the details maybe later and hear from folks on the ground, kind of their thoughts around the various ways we do that. But I'm not advocating that we put that language in the application around a trust or anything.
Okay, great. I just wanted make sure. But I think it's a good point and will be a useful exercise. Ramses?
Oh, sorry, I have a comment for the workforce and contractor equity agreement. I don't know if this is the right place or it's a separate section.
Well, we actually only got through one of Robin's comments, but so if I could just really quickly, maybe, kind of address the second part of his question, which was that there were no comments relating to gentrification. Since that has been an important consideration of the committee, I think some mention which should be made regards to restrictions associated with building and land improvements. The grant agreement does include a clause prohibiting using PCEF funded improvements as a basis for raising rents, sort of per the code. And I wasn't sure if that kind of addressed your concern. I think the only other thing that I would say about gentrification and displacement is that, like we discussed at our last meeting, I think our thinking is that to put together kind of a plan where grant for next round, when there will be grants that are much bigger, where the grant caps will be bigger, so the potential for actually having a project that is large enough to have that impact, that we'll be working with our anti-displacement team within the Bureau to kind of develop a method of flagging those types of projects and then and requiring a sort of co-created anti-displacement plan. But that's not a this year requirement. That wouldn't be a this year requirement because our grant caps are so low this year.
So I appreciate that. And when I reviewed this document, I didn't know that the sample grant agreement was ready. I still haven't seen it, but you know, if that language is in there, that's fine. I just want to make sure that applicants know upfront that that language and those restrictions are going to be in place. I don't, you know, not everybody's going to look through the grant agreement. So I just don't want organizations to be surprised that, oh, we're going to put a lien on your property to prevent gentrification, and that, kind of, surprises them after they've been, not awarded, but they've been informed that they got the grant. So it's more of an expectation thing.
Yeah, I mean, and that was part of the reason that that was really the rationale behind the sort of that list of restrictions, of funding restrictions, which are also funding uses, is that we wanted to, all of those things will also be in the grant agreement if funds are awarded, but there are some things that we're we just really need to make sure that people know this up front. So if that feels like that is one of those as well, we can easily add that to the list in the handbook just to highlight it so that people are more likely to see it.
I would personally like to have some statement about gentrification and anti-displacement. Again, I think it's been brought up many times in this committee, and just to state up front that we are concerned about this, it just makes it more obvious to all the applicants. So I would be in favor of having a simple statement up front about that.
Okay. So Ramses had a comment about workforce contractor equity, and but I wanted to make sure, Robin, that there weren't other things on your list that you felt you wanted to discuss as a committee.
No, most of the other ones are clarification, and for either me or for the applicant, and I leave it up to you to if it's worth incorporating or not. So I think I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, great. Ramses?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to thank you for those comments, Robin, on gentrification. Just want to remind folks, I think originally in the application process, we did ask a question originally on asking applicants around anti-displacement measures. That was taken off. But maybe as we think about year 2, year 3, how gentrification or displacement, and I think it's displacement is the key issue that we're worried about, is how that displaces our community folks, how we're thinking holistically on displacing folks. But on the contractor and workforce equity agreement, just wanted to thank PCEF staff for incorporating a zero tolerance requirement policies there. So just wanted to send my appreciations for inclusion on that. Some items that I think were raised for me in our conversations historically around workers impacted by our projects, or making sure that worker voices are incorporated. A few things come to mind that I think are workforce and contractor equity is missing as a requirement. One is a whistleblower retaliation protection. So again, any person who's a victim of harassment or sexual harassment or racial harassment or any potential harm on a construction project, there currently exists no whistleblower protection to raise those. So just want to raise that as a potential flag. In addition to that, I think one of the best tools for workers that should be affirmed here is the right to organize. So oftentimes you or I, or most of us, won't have the capacity to make sure that most of these provisions are protecting the people that it's intended to protect. Generally, when something bad happens at a work site, it's workers, and if there's no worker protection clauses or whistleblower protection, it's the collective action of workers to protect that. Our federal laws currently recognize that every worker has a right to organize, and I think it'd be nice to see that reaffirmed in the workforce contractor equity agreement, some kind of language that affirms that. It's not to affirm or require that applicants have a union or contractors have be unionized. It's just affirming the right for workers to organize collectively when they choose to, without fear of intimidation. But those are two comments that two suggestions I propose to be captured here, just to protect those workers that I think that we won't have the capacity nor the current process to protect workers on PCEF funded projects.
So I'm going to click Ramfis. Ramfis flagged this earlier, so I'm going to capture at least the language that we had written down in order to capture this. It was in order, and this is the right, essentially affirming this right to organize, is that grant recipients, contractors, and subcontractors shall not oppose worker efforts to organize, nor shall they retaliate or otherwise create a hostile environment to workers who choose to engage in collective conversations or actions regarding workplace issues.
Are there any questions or thoughts on that from other committee members? Andrea gave it a hand clap.
Thank you so much for raising that, Renfis. I think that it's really important that organizers, labor organizers and workers can see codified in this agreement their right to organize, and that, you know, as a committee, there's a thing to point to say, no, you have to allow this.
A thumbs up from Michael. So I think that, more thumbs up from Shanice and Maria. Robin, general agreement. I think that as we, if we get to a point, which hopefully we will tonight, to ask for someone on the committee to make a proposal to approve the RFP materials, we'll want to add sort of that with this change to the workforce contractor equity agreement. And we can maybe at that time pull up that language, Sam, you could pull up that language again just so we have it, or you can reference that language.
Absolutely. The other piece, Ramses, that you mentioned, I just want to check that we didn't capture this, is that we do ask for, as part of the zero tolerance policy, that we ask for contractors to furnish, and we will provide them a sample, but we ask them to define and make available organizations' internal procedures for, and this is the last bullet in the workforce and contractor equity section, support impacted workers and whistleblowers. I explain how leadership will report back on steps taken to address the incident, how workers were protected against retaliation, where workers can go for support, and anti-retaliation policy and training. So, I mean, that's actually an EG. So those are examples given, and so we can be a little bit more specific, but it's asked for as part of an organization's internal procedures, as part of their as part of a zero tolerance policy. I don't know if that captures that, Ramses, or if that's not quite there.
I think it would be great to strengthen that language to incorporate whistleblower protection as a requirement. I think it's great to have plans, but even having a whistleblower protection doesn't necessarily always protect workers or creates safe conditions for workers to make a whistleblower complaint. But I think it's a good start. It's a better start than I think what many companies are offering at the moment. And I think it will be in alignment with what we already consider some of our high road employers in our communities as already having those policies in place. Obviously, this is an area that we can do better and should do better. And I'm hopeful that in our region, we'll be having substantive conversations around how we protect around cases around several forms of harassment. But I think an early thing that we can do right now, just being explicit and having those reflect our values when individuals do have serious complaints that they want to blow the whistle on and are able to seek the protections they should deserve to have.
Okay. What I'm restating here, Ramses, in the template, it says, support. It originally says support of impacted workers or whistleblowers, and I just want to check if this captures it. It says that a zero tolerance policy must include support of impacted workers and whistleblowers. If we were to reframe that a zero tolerance policy, that they must have a zero tolerance policy, and it must include both support and protection of impacted workers and whistleblowers, or is it, I guess I want to make sure we're capturing, because I know that support is different than protection, but there may be just more nuance that we need to work to. So I want to see if that gets to it and gives us enough room to further work with folks to tease that out. So I know you just turned off the camera, so I'm going to give you some time to come back, and basically when it makes sense. Yeah.
Sorry, just getting some love from my puppy over here.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. You heard it?
Yeah, I don't want to stretch this out too long. It does seem like the difference between support and protect are different. I think I don't want to create so much change from already substantive feedback on this. I think it was really just one specific point around being explicit around just whistleblower protection. But I know there was a lot of thought put into this original language that I think if it's worth revisiting for another time, I'm willing to make that space. But I think to me there is a difference between just requiring that whistleblower protection versus supporting whistleblowers and providing that employers provide that those plans. So I think that requires time and follow through from those, and I think those are things that could get lost in the shuffle. But a requirement makes it explicit. Hey, this is something we expect all employers, and that's catching up what we think is a high road approach for how we create a more inclusive workforce for all workers.
I think that was our, I think that it was our intent, but we didn't explicitly include it. We had examples. So I think that wouldn't, to add both support and protect impacted workers and whistleblowers, I do not think would substantively change. It would add protection, but I don't think it was necessarily far out of the line of what we were thinking. So I just want to, and so that's, I do have the change that would at least bring firm up the language if you're going to go beyond support, but to protect impacted workers and whistleblowers.
Thank you.
Are there any other, so just a quick time check, it's 8:26. And I just wanted to, and we have, you know, as much time as things take. So, but are there any other questions or comments on the material that y'all were sent to review? So if that is the case, then I'd like to ask if there are any committee members who would be interested in making a proposal to approve with the change, or with the change that to the workforce contractor equity agreement that we just talked about. And Sam, I don't know if you want to, if you can share, it would be, if it would be helpful to share a screen, to share your screen to see.
I can. I've got the changes that we've discussed. Let me.
I'm going to stop share real quick.
Let me just capture this one piece.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Do folks see my screen? Okay, the three, I may not have captured the latter ones correctly. Some of the original ones correctly. It's just one was to add language around preventing PCEF funded improvements from allowing landlords to displace tenants, clarify language around transfer of property, clarify language that transfer of property will not be banned without cause. And as far as the workforce and contractor equity agreement additions, we would add that grant recipients, contractors, and subcontractors shall not oppose worker efforts to organize, nor shall they retaliate or otherwise create a hostile work environment to workers who choose to engage in collective conversations or action regarding workplace issues. And that the zero tolerance policy must include support and protection of impacted workers and whistleblowers.
Any comments or additions, clarifications to that? So I'd like to get a sort of, I guess I'd like to take a temperature check since I don't see anyone leaping up to make this proposal, and see how comfortable, if people would feel kind of cool or warm, and warm being, you know, the affirmative, toward a proposal to approve the RFP material that we sent you with these changes, adding language around preventing PCEF funded improvements from allowing landlords to displace tenants, clarifying language that transfer of property will not be banned without cause, and then providing these changes to the workforce and contractor equity agreements. So I'm just going to call on you all and ask you to tell me to give me your temperature. Megan?
I feel warm, and thank you, Rfp, for bringing up those points for the workforce and contractor equity agreement.
Maria?
Mostly warm, although some of the wording around banned without cause is not quite hitting the mark for me. I'm trying to think through if that captures the things that Michael generated in the discussion, but I don't know. Otherwise, most of this sits well with me.
And I agree. I think that we can definitely work on the language to make it more reflective of the conversation that happened. Michael?
I am warm. I would also like to, once again, the only thing that I'm not sure about is transfer of property I don't know how I feel about that, but if it's, I guess that's my only thing, is the wording of that. And once again, I don't know about it being our job to police after a project's complete. So that's all I have about that.
Robin?
I'm pretty warm. Again, ditto the last comments, just the language around that second bullet. I don't like the term without cause. I'm not an attorney, and I never liked that phrasing. But I think you know the intent of the collective intent of the group.
Thanks. Rfp?
I'm feeling pretty warm. Thanks everyone for their comments. Happy to offer if it's helpful to add some language on that transfer property, to add maybe just cause, so it will not be prohibited without just cause. So tries to add not just a cause, but fairness into the equation. But I understand if folks feel like that still doesn't necessarily correct addresses fully the concerns on this one subject.
Shanice?
Yeah, I think overall I'm feeling like it's a very solid package with the handbook and on the components in the RFP. And as we're processing some of these additional pieces, I think I resonate especially with the contractor equity additions. I think similar to Michael, I'm just grappling with our role in maybe and if what it looks like to set expectations around the transfer of property, and just wanting to explore more of that conceptually. And also I think there is for me, it's not an area of expertise, but I'm thinking about landlords being one part of how a displacement can happen, and is there room to expand on this notion of preventing displacement from tenants and maybe some other root causes that may surface in the funds and or corporations or other agencies? I'm not sure, and potentially what that looks like to expand on who gets to displace, or maybe it's just displacing the tenants and removing a descriptor of who is not allowed to displace someone. But I definitely think the way that projects we're talking about do allow for partnerships and potentially a nebulous structure. So I'm just processing that.
Sorry, I got distracted thinking about words there. Faith?
I'm warm.
Jeffrey?
I'm warm. I think they're all good ads, especially the workforce and contractor equity agreement additions. Those are much thorough, much needed. So thanks for that, Ramses. I also liked the both sides that both Faith and Michael made with the property acquisition. That balancing act of making sure that we're not that people aren't just able to flip the property, but at the same time that we're not becoming the police and telling the tenants what they can and can't do with the property, especially when it's involved in their own communities. So I think that balancing act and adding that in is very well done. And also, lastly, obviously the gentrification aspect of it. So I'm warm on all of this. Very good ads, everyone.
Andrea?
I'm warm.
Okay. So if everyone is warm, would someone like to make a proposal?
I propose that we accept the complete package as amended by these 3 points.
Second.
And Megan, sorry, I just saw Megan's hand came up. Megan?
Yeah, I just was going to offer some word choices, maybe. Maybe we don't need that right now, but in the first bullet, I wonder, to get to Shanice's point, if we could just add after landlords something like comma or other causes to be a little bit more holistic there. And then in the second one, I think what's throwing me is it's like written in this double negative form. So I actually get really lost in like what that even is. And the addition of just cause made it more legal sounding to me versus less legal sounding. So can we just say like property may be transferred depending on situation or something like that? I don't know. But if we don't need to wordsmith it, I'm ready to vote. But I was just offering some possible language that would help me understand more of what we're saying in the second bullet point, at least.
I think that the wordsmithing, I think that we should probably do that after the meeting and in coordination with our city attorney, just to make sure that we're not kind of swerving outside our lanes. But I do think that, we definitely hear the message loud and clear that what we want to do is sort of express our commitment to both self-determination and to kind of protecting the benefits that were, ensuring that the benefits that were evaluated in the application process are actually happening. So I think that we can come up with something that sounds less legally and hopefully captures what both Michael and Faith kind of expressed and hits a balance there. And then Sam, I don't know if we need to take a pause on voting and go back to just clarifying that about the restriction on the uses of funds. I think the code language says that PCEF grant funded improvements to properties cannot be used as a reason, I'm paraphrasing here, can't be used to increase rents.
I was looking for that language as we were talking about this. That's
okay.
exactly what yeah, I've got it right here. Funding agreements shall include terms to encourage rent stability, including but not limited to provisions barring owners from using improvements funded by PCEF as a basis for rent increases. And so that would be the element that would follow into the contract. But that's really it's the focus is owners of buildings not using any improvements to increase rent.
And I think that's where the transfer of property is important, so that once it's increased, that they just don't sell it to their own other LLC and then increase rents because they no longer own the building.
Mm-hmm.
You know, San Francisco style.
Mm-hmm. So the first two bullets, I think that we can, so what I'm hearing is that we don't necessarily need to change the first bullet. I mean, obviously we'll massage the language a little bit, but that I don't know if there is someone who is an owner who is not called a landlord, but we might just use the term owner to be a little bit more kind of comprehensive there. Okay, let's go back to voting. We were on a roll. We had, Andrea had made the proposal, and we had a second, and I apologize, but I forget who seconded it. Anyone willing to?
I did.
Oh,
Second.
Robin did. Okay. So now I'm just gonna call on each of you and ask you if you will agree, or if you need to have more conversation. Megan?
Agree.
Maria?
I agree, but I'll probably have more conversation with Sam after. And one more plug, the minutes, I don't know if I'm just having brain fog, but let me just throw that out there.
We pushed approval of the minutes off to next meeting. But thank you. I'll probably need your reminder next week. Michael?
Yes. I forget what I'm supposed to say. I just got minutes stuck in my head. Approve. Agree.
Okay. Thank you. Francis?
Approve.
Shanice?
Approve.
Faith?
I agree and approve and all those other things too.
Great. And Jeffrey?
I agree.
Okay. That is everyone. Thank you all. I made a list. I did get everyone this time because we had a first and a second, so they didn't have to vote. Well, thank you all very much for the 6 months plus worth of work that you have put into getting to this point. We all really appreciate how much you put into it, and know that this is a much better product because of it.
This is huge. This is huge.
Thank you all.
We're so excited to push this out.
Yes. All right, Sam, I don't know if you want to like talk about bylaws for 15 minutes or what, but I feel like my work here is done.
Let's hear, Katie, you have the slides. If you can share the slides, I think maybe we'll just do a tee up the bylaws discussion. I don't think we need to jump too far, but I want to just tee up the discussion. So if you queue up the slides again, I think I stopped sharing.
Yeah, I was trying to do, oh, you did stop sharing, okay.
So as we start, maybe I'll before I turn it over to James, I think, well, our hope today, and we knew this, I think, as you see, we're trying to tighten up loose ends with the training that we had earlier. And our hope before we have Angie apart from us is to make sure that we approve we get to a decision on the bylaws. And so we know that we did send that after a lot of documents. I think, Robin, you were the one that asked, you're like, should I be reviewing this sooner? I was like, well, if folks can get to a decision, maybe we'll take one, but I suspect maybe not. And so I think what we just want to do is quickly just flag that maybe at a high level, what we hope to get to on our next committee meeting, which would be a discussion of the bylaws and really just overview of those. We sent a red line version to you all as well as a cleaned up version, so you can just track the changes in between and acknowledge that. I think as a reminder, we hope that when the working agreements are something that we would work on and we expect to work on when we bring Amanda on, and that the election of co-chairs would be something that would be a decision that Amanda would get to participate in. So if folks are interested in jumping into the bylaws now, I'm sure we can James is teed up and ready to bring a refresher, but otherwise I think we just wanted to at least acknowledge that's the next step in the conversation, is get brought back up, see the changes folks have made. And there's one really discussion point that I know Michael and Andrew will lay out in terms of the term limits, but I don't know if we have to dig into that in the last 14 minutes or so we have left. I think, but we're certainly willing to entertain and we're ready to have that discussion if folks want to have it.
I'm going to jump in real quick, but I would love it if we could kind of tee it up for folks to think about before our next meeting. And then when they come back to the next meeting, then maybe we can, jump into it, but have some thoughts about it for like kind of have floating around the back of your head.
Great, thanks, Michael. And yeah, huge thanks to Michael and Andrea for being on the subcommittee and doing a lot of work on these bylaws. It has been, I want to say almost 2 months since you all have seen as a full committee some of this content. And so just wanted to kind of do a high level overview and reminder of what the difference is between the bylaws document and the working agreements, because both documents are still in development at this stage. And so the bylaws are really the agreement of protocols and the way that the committee works between the committee and the city, so to speak. And kind of the formal roles that the committee has and some of the relationship to city staff, some of the elements about communications protocols, the basic structure of the committee, including, and as we'll talk about, some very concrete things like term limits and how often the committee needs to meet at minimum, and the decision-making protocols and procedures. We're intentionally not calling it voting because we're using a modified consensus decision-making process, and Andrea has been very good at different points and reminding us that we're not calling what we do voting, but it is decision-making. And so as you'll see in the document, there's that structure which you all agreed on now many months ago towards beginning of the year. The working agreements are more of a living document that are relationships that you hold among each other to hold each other accountable. And so these are more around the norms of leadership, different roles within the committee structure, and how you engage with each other as committee members. This is something that we do see evolving, and the structure is set up to where there would be at least an annual check-in on that, but also whenever there's a new committee member, there would be the opportunity for that committee member to, or the appointment of that committee member to be a process check to then reaffirm the working agreements. So I'm not going to go in detail due to time into all the elements, but there are a couple pieces in particular that we want to highlight, kind of as Michael said, or tee up the conversation around for more decision-making about the bylaws. So go ahead and go next slide. So one of the key pieces is really a decision needs to be made about term limits for committee members as a whole, and also term limits for the co-chairs. or the co-chair people model that has been proposed as officers to help guide and lead the committee. And so the first, I'd say, functional decision point of long-term limits is the number of consecutive terms that a committee member can serve. The way that it's written right now, and has been the topic of discussion among the subcommittee, is to allow up to 8 years of total consecutive service, with a kind of clause there that completion of an unexpired term does not apply to the 8-year cumulative. So for some of you who were brought in kind of serving a 2-year term, that would not count towards that 8 years. I'd say the balance, or things to consider, is one of recognizing that it is going to take a few grant cycles to really come up to speed and have a full understanding of grant processes and make modifications cycle to cycle, and that there's some value to that continuity, weighed against the value for new ideas and kind of fresh perspectives coming onto the committee more frequently. And so, I'd say that is the trade-off between, if we were to put the term limits to 1 term only, or 4 years of consecutive service, then people would cycle through on a more frequent basis, and we would have more kind of fresh energy into the committee, but potentially not as much continuity or kind of year-to-year experience. And so that is, I don't know, Michael and Andrea, if you want to talk more about your perspectives on that, but I think where we've landed as a subcommittee is for the recommendation for 8 years maximum of consecutive terms. Oh, go ahead, Sam.
And I do want to. I'm looking at the watch, not to have this. I think it's important that we do hear from Michael and Andrea. But I would say this is one of the pieces that I'd love to be able to leave folks to be able to simmer and think about as well. But I think it's important that Michael, you and Andrea both speak to it as well. And then I'd love to kind of switch to some of our next meetings after this and just give a little time for the committee.
If you don't mind me starting, I would say that I would like to hear from other people their perspectives on 4 versus 8 years. I think the positives of 4 years is you get more community members from a greater variety of the communities that we're hoping to represent in. But what also 8 years is, it does allow you to have people on that know how it's going, and it allows some people to stay for 8. You can always opt out at 4. And also part of what I like about, so I think 8 years is a positive. I think 4 years has a lot of things going for it, but 8 years I think is a positive. So if I'd like, while everybody's at home for the next week, to kind of think about what are some of the positive negatives for 8 or 4 years, and what you'd like to see.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think, we've gone back and forth about this quite a lot in the last 5 months. And I feel like where I sit is kind of thinking about how long it takes for somebody to come in, especially into an established group. We had the benefit of all coming in together fresh. And learning the group norms and figuring out where they can push and use their own authority in the group dynamic, and also just learn all of the processes. And I think we may find that some people don't really rise into their full participation in the first year or the first 2 years, but then they really got it down by year 4. So I would hate to lose that learning and that momentum. I also think we will see people cycle off. Things will happen. So not everybody, even if they have opted for 8 years, will end up serving the full 8 years. And I think that will create some churn and some new energy.
Great. Yeah, thank you both. And yeah, just encourage everybody to think about those multiple perspectives as we get ready to have this conversation for the next committee meeting. The other piece that was related to term limits is the structure that's proposed for not having a single chair, but 2 co-chair people to help guide the agenda setting, communications roles, and a number of different elements that would be defined in the working agreements. And there's a proposal for the co-chair peoples, or the co-chairs, I'll shorten it, to serve 3-year maximum terms, so that within kind of any given person's, I guess, tenure, there would be at least 1 rotation of that. Also, that being a maximum, but a recognition that people may choose to step down from that co-chair role at any time within that 3 years, you know, with no judgment or like for any reason, basically. And so that's another kind of term limit element to think about. And also, you know, we're not going to be making any decisions on the co-chair people and who's in those roles, but start thinking yourself and reflecting on whether you might be interested in one of those roles as we move forward with the grant program and the process. I think our intention broadly is not to make any decision on the working agreements and those allocation of roles until Amanda is on board. So just to be able to acknowledge her role, and maybe I'll stop there unless Sam, you want to talk more about the calendar and the expectations there.
No, I think I'd love to. I mean, I think we've got a good set of things for folks to be thinking about before we come back for the next meeting. And so we will just bring this back up to your inboxes so you can be thinking about these pieces. And then I'd love to just kind of run down. We've got a couple minutes, run down through just a couple of things that we're thinking about for the next meetings. So we will bring back the bylaws. Amanda, the city council has we've got a tentative a hold date on October 1st at 3 p.m. to go in front of city council for Amanda's appointment. So I'd love to see whether folks are just interested in, and we will be providing an update for city council as well. So I'd love to know any interested committee members that would be interested in joining, and we can tease out roles and how we can tease out our presentation format for that. After getting Amanda on board, we'll hope to have a committee meeting where we'll make a decision on co-chair. So we hope you all do get thinking, because October 1st isn't too far away, and we hope that we can. I know we've been operating with our co-chairs for quite a while, and I think now as we get into the RFP, it'll be really important to have that. We have a discussion on engaging the public in meetings that we will be hosting for you all, just to talk that through, what it means to change think about our committee meeting format, and how do we engage the public more in our committee meetings. We've got a summary on the application support grant process, which we're tying up, which we've got to bring to you all, and that'll be one of the next meetings here. And then we just love to hear as we start kind of getting our heads up, and we will dig right back down soon, but just other topics and things you are interested in teasing out and discussing. Those are just some of the things that we've got sort of on deck, and we know we need to get on one of our next agendas. That's all I want to leave you all, and just thank you all for all the fun and work, and at least leave some time here. It is almost time, but that doesn't mean we have to close this out. Leave time for you all to just share any closing member committee comments.
Francis?
Deepest appreciation to staff and helping shepherd the process to where we are right now. I'm very thankful for all the work that each of you have done to engage community keep us engaged and running through a process as we're building that process together. So I just wanted to share my deepest appreciation, and to many of the community members that have put the time and energy and effort to help inform and shape this policy. Like, I hope community members feel like they were able to shape and have their imprint into this application. And I think it really sets the tone for how we revise and revisit each of our applications. So I'm very excited around just all the work that you've all done during a pandemic, during, I think during this current moment that we are facing around calls for racial and social justice, and for calls around just action within our local communities, and the current moment that highlights that we are and continue to be in a climate crisis. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I know that this building this program within a year, less than a year, is a challenge and endeavor in of itself. So I just wanted to share my deepest appreciation for staff and the patience and everyone's patience with us in this process. And I hope it's been worth that time and effort, and I'm looking forward to this next stage and just helping promote this program and see this program be successful. So I'm very excited for this next stage, and just thankful for all the committee members and their leadership. And my personal opinion is I feel like everyone here could be a great co-chair, and would love to see every folks stepping up. And I know everyone brings a different flavor to their leadership, and I just appreciate that. So thank you.
Thanks, Ramsey. Maria?
Yeah, same thing. I want to express my gratitude to the staff and my peers for also joining multiple subcommittees and helping to churn out some of these big deliverables. I'm just always in awe of you all, and thanks for keeping this good energy around this effort. It inspires me a whole lot, and I'm glad to be at this milestone with all of you. Thanks to Andrea and Michael for generating a really important discussion around land acquisition and all the complexities. I think what I would like to chat with Sam more about, and maybe anyone else, is really like how we're seeing wealth generation and wealth building for the communities who need it most, and what types of biases and assumptions we make around that, and how we can fully support communities of color be their best selves with this type of investment. So thanks everybody for your thoughtfulness. It's amazing.
Thank you, Maria. All right, well, thank you all. Oh, Sam just put his finger up. Sam, you're muted.
Please fill out that survey so we can figure out a time for those that are game. To figure out a park celebration so we can send Andrea. So thank you all. Just from the bottom of our hearts, thank you all. Really appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to folks who are listening, members of the public.
Good night, y'all.
Congrats all.
All right, good night.
All right,
Good night.
good night.
Oh, thanks
Yeah.
for all
Night.
the work.
Congratulations.